All right, we are back on the DU Sports Podcast following a week of ups and downs for BYU sports, in particular basketball. But hey, it is March, isn't it? You got to have some madness. Josh and I both traveled down to Vegas to witness the massacre that was Gonzaga versus BYU in the championship game. We will be discussing a little bit later about what BYU's run in the WCC tournament means for their postseason hopes. The team lost 74 to 55 to the Bulldogs Tuesday night at the Orleans Arena, despite Yoli Childs remaining perfect from three, 6 for 6 in the tournament, and an all-tournament team selection for the sophomore forward. Women's basketball was knocked out early last week against San Diego, and with no real chance at an NIT bid, they will probably see their season come to an end.
Men's volleyball extended its win streak to 9 games and remains unbeaten in conference play following impressive wins over number 8 Pepperdine and number 3 UCLA in the Smith Fieldhouse. The team is in Hawaii for the Outrigger Resorts Invitational for its toughest stretch of the season, with games against number 11 Penn State, number 8 Lewis, and number 2 Hawaii. And number 21 Gymnastics will hold their senior night in the Smith Fieldhouse, competing against Penn State, Texas Women's University, and Utah State.
Softball split its games at the Husky Classic in Washington and is currently in Hawaii for the Spring Fling Tournament. With a 9-12 record, the team looks to get back on track before returning to Provo on March 16th. Baseball had its home opener last night following 3 road losses at number 18 Auburn to end the preseason road trip. The team has a 12-game homestand before beginning conference play at the end of the month. Brock Hale was named WCC Player of the Week despite the team's losses and 5-6 record on the road. Now, getting back to basketball, what are this team's chances of getting into the NIT and making a serious run? And then what are some of the questions and answers we received from their run in the WCC tournament?
Yeah, well, right now, NYC Buckets and BracketMatrix.com have BYU as a 6 seed, while DRatings.com has the Cougars as a 5 seed, so it's right there in the middle of the mix for an NIT bid. I personally think BYU's track record of selling tickets definitely has to come into play for the NIT when they're thinking about if they want to see the Cougars or not. But you do have to remember that regular season conference champions get an automatic berth to the NIT if they don't win their conference tournament or make the big dance. And so there's, as some of these, especially smaller conferences, get to their championship games, here's where we're ending up with Selection Sunday this week. If there's any upsets, number 2 or lower seeds taking the title, often for these one bid leagues, that's it. And so those teams will automatically be invited to the NIT. So some of those spots will start to fill up, and it could be tight, but I definitely think that the NIT would want to invite BYU. And you could see them playing Oregon, who upset Utah in the Pac-12 tournament the other day, Boise State, even a rematch with Utah. So those are kind of the options that we're looking at with BYU. I'd definitely be interested to see them play Boise State, especially with the speculation of the Mountain West expansion swirling around, just to see how this BYU team would stack up against an upper tier Mountain West team. How about you, Caleb?
Yeah, definitely. I think I would definitely like to see them play someone outside of Utah, or besides Utah, I should say, because I feel like playing Utah again wouldn't really prove much for this team. They've already beaten them. They've already kind of declared themselves the best team in Utah after sweeping, going through UVU and Utah State and Weber State, beating all those guys. So I'm not sure what another game against Utah can really do for them. Boise State and Oregon could be really fun. You mentioned, Boise State in the Mountain West, and if Gonzaga and BYU make that jump, that could be an interesting preview to see what kind of competition we're dealing with there. But also, I mean, neither one of those should be a huge challenge for the Cougars. Either way, I'm definitely looking for BYU to come out of the first round easily, and if they don't, I think it would be a huge disappointment, especially considering last year getting out in the first round against UT Arlington. So I think, after beating St. Mary's and going to that WCC championship game, the fans really, they need some kind of deep run. I think if they were to get out in the first round, I think that'd be kind of a disappointment. I don't know what you think about, what result would you expect from the team?
Yeah, there's a phrase that I have just grown to dislike over the last couple of years, and it's "we're a young team."
Yeah.
But of all the years that I've heard that, it definitely fits this year. No seniors. Definitely getting some postseason experience is always big. Always like to see the Cougars play, of course. And like you said, that drubbing that UT Arlington dropped on the Cougars last year definitely ended the season just with that sour note and just kind of lingered through the offseason, in my opinion. So to get that solid win over St. Mary's in Vegas and then come out pretty flat against Gonzaga, it's kind of that balancing point right now
Mm,
that if you do end up in the NIT and just come out flat again, you look at, what do we have to build off of? The one upset over St. Mary's, who for some people is even on the bubble for the big dance with that
right,
loss, which
right.
just kind of boggles my mind with them being in the top 25. But we'll leave it to the committee to figure that one out. But yeah, getting in there, you at least got to win the first game. Most likely, it's going to be on the road, so it'd be a good challenge.
Yeah.
So definitely gotta get a deep run. A couple years ago when they went to Madison Square Garden, that was fun. I mean, obviously, just not the same as being in the field of 68, but you take what you get and can use that as a springboard for a strong off season. Come back next year ready to roll with more experience.
Yeah, totally. And we should be getting Bryant obviously and Childs back next year. Neither one's a senior. And I think in the WCC tournament where we really saw Yoli Childs come into his own. There's kind of been this not really competition, but this question in everybody's mind throughout the year. Who is the better or more dominant player between Yoli and Eli? And I think they both have the ability to take over games, especially on the offensive end. But I think really in that WCC semifinal and championship game, we saw Yoli's potential and his huge upside, especially if he's hitting those threes consistently. And it just his effect on the game, especially on the offensive end, is huge. So that's something to look forward to, hopefully for the next couple of years for BYU fans. All right, so next up we've got Voice of the Cougars, Greg Wrubell on the line. Thanks for joining in, Greg.
My pleasure.
So to start out, what did you kind of see from BYU in the WCC tournament that can give us kind of a hint as to how they'll play, hopefully get into the NIT and what kind of run they can make there?
Well, I think you saw a resurgent BYU team that played two of its best offensive games in the quarterfinals and the semifinal. I think BYU ran out of gas a little bit against Gonzaga, and Gonzaga is a number 6 team that can make a lot of really good teams struggle on a given night, and that's what happened to BYU. So one of the best things about the NIT is you're going to see a new set of opponents that don't know you as well as a Gonzaga does, having played you for a third time in the year and having seen you for the last 7 years. So you see a new set of eyes looking at you, which is beneficial. And it's not going to be Gonzaga who you're playing in the first round of the NIT, presuming BYU gets in. And so the last game isn't the best barometer for how BYU's playing. I think the quarterfinal and semifinals are better barometers, and the fact that BYU beat St. Mary's says a lot about the potential for this year's team and the capacity of this year's team, as St. Mary's is a real offensive machine and the best shooting team in college basketball, and BYU had to play very, very well to beat that team. And so I look at the positives of the quarterfinals and semifinals and acknowledge just how good Gonzaga is and was in the finals.
Right. And you kind of mentioned, that obviously BYU is not going to be playing, Gonzaga or St. Mary's in the NIT. So who would you like to see the Cougars face in the NIT, and what's kind of the minimum result that you're expecting out of this team as far as, how far they're going to go maybe?
Well, only 5 teams are in the field right now, and it's really hard to say or hard to pick an opponent not knowing what the field's going to look like.
Right.
So it'd be tough to pick and choose who you might want BYU to see. It'd be great if BYU can get a home game, which means being up to a 4 seed. Last year BYU was a 3, and all of the recent BYU appearances in the NIT. 2013, 2016, 2017, BYU had home games in all of those, and BYU's tended to draw well for NIT games, and certainly the committee considers that. That's not the only consideration, but I think one of the reasons BYU got a favored seed last year was how well BYU does play and draw in the NIT. So, more than anything, I hope that BYU gets a home game in the first round. Now, of the different NIT projections you look at, they're anywhere from a 3 to a 6 right now. So a 3 and 4 gets you at home, and a 5 and 6 puts you on the road.
Right.
And so, I do know that a couple of popular picks for the NIT right now regionally are Boise State and Utah. Both teams lost last night, and likely both teams saw their bubble burst. And so it wouldn't be surprising at all to see both Boise and Utah in the NIT. And the NIT tends to go geographical when they can, and so those are a couple of potential first-round foes for BYU, whether home or away. But that said, BYU's recent appearances, 2016, 2017, saw teams from the Midwest or the East coming to face BYU in Provo. So it's really tough to say which way the committee will go. Again, my only hope right now, as opposed to opponent, would be a home game if possible.
Gotcha. And at the start of the season, Coach Rose, the whole team kind of mentioned that their goal was to make it back to the NCAA tournament. So I think for a lot of fans, it can be kind of disappointing going to a third straight NIT. But when you take into account, everything this team has kind of gone through and accomplished, you got to feel pretty good about the season. What is kind of your overall takeaway, after seeing most of this season play out?
Well, the goal every year is to be in the NCAA tournament, so that won't change for Dave Rose. That said, you lose a couple of really big components off of last year's team unexpectedly. These were not things for which Dave Rose could plan. That is, Eric Mika deciding to leave 2 years on the table to go play, second division ball in Italy. That one you didn't see coming. You certainly didn't see coming Nick Emery leaving the team on the eve of the season. So having overcome those two personnel hits in conjunction with all the various personnel hits BYU's taken over the last 3, 4, or 5 seasons with players choosing to go play elsewhere. And Dave Rose's long-term plans have really been quite discombobulated from 3 or 4 years ago. So, the challenges BYU faced, I think they met well for the most part. Every team would like to go back and have a game or two to play over. And if those had a different result, BYU might be looking at something, better than an NIT proposition right now. But that said, 24 wins is kind of right where Dave Rose, tends to be. He averages 25 wins a year, which is an amazing thing. People just can't take for granted how tough it is to win 25 games a year for 13 straight years. But that's exactly what Dave Rose has done. He's sitting at 24 right now. So as long as you're, playing in those top 2 tournaments every year, you want to be in the NCAAs. That's 68 teams. NIT gets you 32 to 100. So if you're one of the, top 100, if you will, of 351 teams, you're not in a bad place. You always want to be in the NCAAs, it goes without saying. And even that said, there are a lot of teams outside of the top 100, if you will, who play in the NCAAs because they've won a conference tournament. So it's not a true top 100. But that said, BYU is going to find itself in the top third to top quartile of college basketball teams on an annual basis, and they have been for 13 straight years. Not a bad place to be. So all in all, I think BYU really had to be a resilient team to overcome some pretty significant personnel challenges, and they've done so to the point where they can find themselves a 25th win in their next game, which is not too bad at all.
Yeah, and just to kind of finish up, what are you most looking forward to as far as the offseason goes, and then looking at next year as far as personnel and what this team is gonna look like come that 2018-2019 season? Well,
the key to BYU having success, and most teams having success, is the ability to get old together. And BYU's just played its second straight senior night without a senior on the floor. That's a really interesting and unique situation to be in. Not too many teams, let alone a BYU, want to go to 2 straight senior nights with no seniors. You want to get old together. You want to have a senior class every year. BYU's not been able to do that. So you want everybody back to begin with. You want to build that core into something that can grow old together. Get Eli, get Yoli, get TJ, get Shear back together, playing again another season. Another year of development for Peyton Dastrup and others. Zach Sellius to recover his game. Dalton Nixon to progress. Get old together remains the key. Then, if it's in the cards for Nick Emery to come back, you hope that happens. He's a prolific shooter and scorer for BYU, and BYU dearly missed him on the three-point line this year. And then with a Gavin Baxter and a Connor Harding joining the program, a couple of highly thought of players, BYU should be better and deeper and stronger next year. The key is to have the group back. Don't lose anybody, and be able to build from that core.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate your input, Greg, and we look forward to hearing you on the call in these NIT games coming up.
I look forward to making those calls, and thanks for inviting me.
All right, appreciate you. Have a good one.
You too.
That's all for this week. Join us next week when we reveal where LeBron will be taking his talents this summer.